most of you in here have at least some soils that are not, that will fall into these categories. And if you have headlands that aren't producing the way you want them to, then Calcine will be able to assist you from that standpoint. We'll talk about in-row use of Calcine, reduction of high pH soils, which isn't as much of an issue out here as it is to the east of here, where we got 8s and 8.5 and 9 pH soils, but I'm sure some of you have some of those areas around sloughs and things like that. We'll talk briefly on small particle technology, biology, and then just an overall basics of pulling everything together that Jim talked about, our whole program, because we all work together. That's the neat part of what we have on a relationship basis from that standpoint. So, Calcine and Protus. Protus is the organic version. Calcine is the one I'm concentrating on here. But increased breakdown of calcium-rich products. So, a lot of soils have a lot of additional calcium in them, but they're just not becoming available from there. We'll see this improved flocculation, opening of that soil, and the reduced compaction. That's where I talk about being able to regain headlands that have a number of trucks drive over them all the time and things like that. We'll be able to work through that without having to do additional tillage from that standpoint. Reduction in soluble salts. One of the samples I looked at for Tim here, soluble salts did not make it to the top of the list, but it's second, and I'm not sure where because it was 18.7 on soluble salts. The highest I've got in North Dakota is at Edgley, North Dakota at 19.5. Okay, the worst I'm working with in the U.S. is on the flats in Utah. Okay, when we take a picture of this field, the Bonneville salt flats is what pops up. Okay, so it's just pure gypsum salts just laying right on top, anywhere from a ½ inch to an inch thick. Okay, and we're recovered about half of a field out of that. It's a 40-acre field that was this way. We've got crops growing now on about half of that. Okay, so we're able to, that one was over 30 soluble salts. A good soluble salt to grow soybeans in is less than 1. So if you can kind of put that into perspective, it's 30 times worse from that standpoint. Okay, so we'll reduce pH due to the bicarbonates and bicarbonates in the water, increase CO2 production around that seed, reduction of calcium in the water for greater efficacy of chemicals, an increased release of holding capacity of nutrients, and then increase of gram-positive and mycorrhizal fungi. And there's a lot more things we're still discovering. Calcine's been in the market just over 15 years. That's like an infant in the fertilizer market, considering 1940s is a lot of the technology we deal with, so over 100 years old. And this has only been in the market for 15, and it's been a steady learning from that standpoint. Calcine was developed by a single individual. ST Biologicals stands for Source Technology. That's what I go look for, I work with. We develop from small technologies and bring them to the market. This has been by far our most successful product, and here in the North Dakota market, we've recovered hundreds of thousands of acres today on saline and sodic soils, okay, from that standpoint. All right, how does it work? Whoops. So, okay, I'm not going to give you a chemistry lesson here, but a little bit from that standpoint. Basically, you got calcium carbonate in the soil. You take water with that, you have calcine, and basically this CO3 becomes CO2 and a free oxygen, which then grabs a couple hydrogen out of the soil and creates a water molecule to create carbonic acid, okay? The base of soda, okay? So if you call it soda or you call it pop, it doesn't matter. It's the carbonation that's in it, okay? That's what it does. It takes a salt, CO3, breaks it off and creates CO2 and a water molecule, okay? Or a pure oxygen around the seed to help it germinate from that standpoint, okay? from there. So that makes it, when you have carbonic acid, the three most important nutrients a plant needs is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay? You take nothing else away from today, think about it from that standpoint. If you don't have oxygen, you live for minutes. If you don't have water, you live for a few weeks. If you don't have carbon, which is food, okay, you'll die faster than me because I got a lot of extra reserves that you don't have. Okay, so I understand that. So no, I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean that to insult you. So, but that's kind of the concept of it. Okay, 94% of a corn plant, bean plant, any tree is made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. All right. When you ask another consultant, what's the three most important nutrient a plant needs? What's the answer? Anybody? NPK. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. That's all they worry about. Okay? That's less than 6% of a total plant. Okay? Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So you had heard Jim talking about CCAT. CCAT is a carbon source. Okay? Molasses. Carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. Okay? Everything fits together in this situation because of that. Okay? So all we're doing is taking carbon, oxygen, and so it's a carbon molecule, C, 3 oxygen, and creating carbonic acid. Okay? That's what this product is doing, taking the salt and making it into something that the plant can use. We do the same thing with calcium sulfate that's in your soil, or that we would apply gypsum. You do the same thing, calcine, we break off the SO4, it grabs a couple hydrogen in there and basically creates a mild sulfuric acid. That releases calcium in the soil. So you get a free calcium, that starts to separate the soil colloids, opens it up, starts to let water do this on the ladder going down, or opens it up so that rooting system can go down. You saw Jim's pictures from the Lidgerwood area. That's exactly what happened, is you had a high salt area, very difficult, high magnesium, very sticky. Walked out in that field and I grew 2 inches with mud on the bottom of my boots. Okay? All right? I can do a lot worse here. I know I can grow 4 or 5 inches and lose my boots out here. Okay? Especially as I go west of here from that standpoint. Okay? But what this does is it creates sulfuric acid. The sulfur then feeds bacteria. The carbon feeds it on the other side and things like that. So we get this available. Part of the reason that salts have continued to build, especially out here, is we used to get 30 units, 35 units of sulfur from the air. Okay, coal burning plant to your west. Okay, used to have quite a bit of coal for electrical generation. All right, now you have DEF, which takes away high sulfur diesel fuels off the market. All of that contributed. Okay, there's a couple of guys in here that's got some gray hair, just like I do. Okay, so when your dads got a snow on grain after it was planted, what did they always say? That's some of the best crops, is because we got snow on small grains, spring seeded wheat, spring seeded oats. Okay, that's because out of that we were dropping a lot of sulfur, a lot of nitrogen from the air. Okay, pH on rainwater used to be 5.5. Today, just 6 weeks ago, looking at a rainstorm, we started at 6.5 and it went to 6. Okay, so we've lost almost a point of pH in this over the last probably 15 years. Okay, we're not dropping as much. So we're not getting as much sulfuric acid, we're not getting as much carbonic acid, because again, this is H2CO3, which creates carbonic acid, which then does this base of allowing that to create that, to get oxygenation into that soil. Okay? So all of that has been affected from that standpoint. Okay? What is the one gas that the government is really worried about out here that's being in the air from that standpoint? Okay? One of this is carbon dioxide, right? They always say we got too much carbon dioxide. We're destroying the earth. Okay? What makes a plant grow? Carbon dioxide. Okay? I mean, this is the fallacy of some of what happens out here. Okay? We want carbon dioxide. That's why the Lord put the stomatas on the underside of a leaf, so when the soil's releasing the carbon and oxygen that Jim talked about, you're getting that to be absorbed in during the day or the early mornings from that standpoint. When you get really hot and dry out here, the stomata's closed to make sure it retains water. Okay? So then we stop some of the growth. But the biggest thing is we're dealing with CO2 or SO4. Okay? Is that all track? Okay? All right. So how do we work with Calcine to do this? Basically, we take initial cores on recovery areas, or we look at your soil samples to determine what's happening. So we take these initial cores. We come back again in 9 to 12 months after the application to look at it again. Okay, so we do a comparative. What do we have when we started? When we do the application, what does it look like from here? Because most everything that's going to happen in the first year is underneath the soil. Okay, does that field feel softer to walk on? Okay, so when you're walking on that headland, can you now take your heel of your boot and dig it in? Okay, it's a simple little easy thing to look at from there. Can we probe it easier? Okay, when you first start, that's why Tim's as big as he is. Okay, from that standpoint, it takes a lot of oomph to get it into the soil. Okay, so I am as big as I am from that standpoint. We got to have the extra weight to get in there. Okay, is there better porosity, water holding capacity? If you have irrigation, is the water no longer running off? Those kind of things. We'll make those analyses. An application is made prior to planting. We'll do a stand count 1 to 2 weeks after germination, so we can then see, are we getting an extra 300, 500,000 plants per acre based on that germination? Okay. We'll look at root development. Jim showed some of the rooting systems with complex and with CCAT and all of that. That's also part of what we look at. Review tissue samples, uptake numbers. Okay, we'll take a look at any of those aspects. And the biggest thing is we look for simple one, earthworm population return porosity. So we look for the castings laying on top. Okay, I asked a group of farmers in Iowa, northeast Iowa, a number of years ago, was presenting, and they basically, I asked them, I said, so tell me, when you were a kid, and one of you can answer this, when you were a kid and you went out to the cornfield or the wheat field and you wanted to have some earthworms, how many shovels did it take to dig up? 1, 2, maybe, to get a half a dozen or a dozen earthworms to fish with or take off with? Okay? So I said, okay, how many would it take today? And one of the smart Alex in the group raised his hand and said, that's why we have bait shops today. Okay, so we don't have to do that. All right? Okay? I also asked them, why they wouldn't grow small grains in northeast Iowa. Okay? And the one guy said, well, if we grew small grains, it would goof up my calendar. And I looked at it and said, what? Well, he said, I do my harvest in the fall, then I go to Florida in November, and then I come back in March, I get my planter ready, I plant my corn and my soybeans, then I have the co-op spray it and put the fertilizers and everything on, and then I go to my cabin in Alexandria. So you're going to ask me to come back to Northeast Iowa in August or late July to harvest small grains? Are you nuts? And I looked right at him and I said, Roundup's made you lazy. I didn't realize he was the board president of the co-op I was speaking to. So from that standpoint, okay? But where I'm getting at is that we've got to think about, when you're looking at this, this is your aeration right here. So if we lose earthworms, we lose the aeration that happens out there. Okay? Especially in a no-till situation. They create channels. They pull that wheat straw down in there and actually create holes where that water will run 6, 12, even further down from that standpoint. Okay? So how does it look? Okay? Some of you can probably relate to this. It's a little bit hard on the wall, but you can see that we've got a lot of white laying on top. Those are carbonates. Those are the CO3. That's what's come out of the ground. This is what gets on. Any of you have white buildup on your faucets or on your filters, or on that? Okay, that's what that is. All right. So that was in one of the first fields we did, Pheasant in North Dakota. So not that far away from here. From there, this was the fall of that year. The thing I ask you to remember is these 3 trees back here. Okay, this guy was ecstatic. If some of you know him, don't say I put his picture up here. Okay, but anyways, but we were standing at 4 foot, 5 foot tall kochia. Okay, he was ecstatic because he had feed for his cows for the winter. So from that standpoint, okay. But this was an area of about 10 acres, 15 acres that wasn't growing anything, hadn't. Okay? Underneath this kochia was growing alfalfa and others that was just thrown out there. It was 4 or 5 inches thick, or 4 or 5 inches tall. But the majority of it was nothing but kochia. Okay? If you don't want kochia to grow, okay, don't use calcine. Okay? Because it is going to make kochia grow, because we release salt. What makes kochia grow? Salt. As you get rid of the salts, the kochia population goes down. Okay? Again, we've got a number of headlands in that pheasant area that we've treated where we don't get that to fall down from that standpoint. If you weren't expecting that, we're worried. So that's all right. So a year, basically the next year later, this is what, you can see the 3 trees, it's a little bit closer shot, but we actually got barley growing in there, okay? Barley can grow up to about a 6 soluble salt, okay? Because what's the 2 things that'll grow when, in this area, when you have high salts? You have kochia, and you have basically foxtail barley will grow, okay? So, if you've got a high salt area, what we want to do is seed it down to barley, harvest that as hay if you can use it, or you can take it as grain. It's not going to do as well, but in this area, barley can pull that out. You can plant a forage barley and it just sucks the salts right out of the ground because we're going to make them available and it's going to pull up from there. Okay? If you would have planted corn out here, it would not have done as well, or planted soybeans, it wouldn't have grown at all, because we hadn't dropped the soluble salts far enough yet from that standpoint. This was about a 9 when we started. 9 to 10 is what we estimated. Okay? All right, so this is the longest running one we have. I've only got through 2024 here, but you can see we started out at 717 parts per million of sodium in high mags at 2710. And after basically all the years of going through it, we ended up at 130 on sodium and about 1,000 on mag. Okay, that's what we've dropped. This is in Crookston, Minnesota, high, Red River Valley, high mag, black soil. Okay, that's what we see from that standpoint. Okay, this is that field. What we were going after was here, no soybeans growing, nothing. You can see that from the NDVI here. And then you can start to see after a couple of years of treatments here, 6 years, we're getting things to grow along these edges. The biggest thing is down here, there was nothing growing. Now we're almost all green on this corner. What this does, Calcine does, is helps release and then move that area being smaller versus getting bigger. Okay? Because a lot of these saline and Sodic spots are just getting bigger every year from that standpoint. Okay? So this is kind of a high pH, high soluble salts. This is one from over in the Washburn area, so that's why I pulled it in this area. But basically you can see boron is extremely high at 3.7. Sulfur, this thing stinks. It's 1137 ppm, over 2,000 pounds of sulfur per acre because it's so tight. Okay? Oops. My fault. I hit the wrong button. You can see base saturation on sodium is 12%. Your calcium is at 44, your mag's at 41. You should have 5 times more calcium. If you go back to Jim's chart he put up, that's what's going on. So, don't look outside. I just saw that coming out of nowhere. It's snowing like mad outside. So, from that standpoint, I understand. It's just crazy. It just, yeah, just wait 24 hours. The weather's going to change, okay, from that standpoint. So, your soluble salts are 3. So, this will grow a little bit of corn, no soybeans, okay? Grow barley, grow a little bit of wheat, but not much, because the soluble salts fall into that category, okay? This is an area of a field, not a whole field sample. This is about 10 acres, 12 acres, around potholes, that kind of stuff, okay? From there. You can see we have a very high P2. P2 is the phosphate that's going to become available. P1 is what's available right now. Olson's 22, P1's 21. So we're all in good shape there. But the biggest thing is when you start looking at your calcium, the magnesium, you look at sodium, all of this is just tying each other up, and that plant is basically not able to take up nutrients. That's what we're looking at. This is what Calcine does to assist from that standpoint.
Tom,
yep.
Can you talk a little bit about AWG Farms when they did the 10 acres?
Yep.
How, when they were tilling?
Yeah, okay. So this year, whenever they hit this side of the field, they would have to downshift. Okay, because of how hard it was. This is a 320 acre field. One driveway right here, right in this area, where they grew sugar beets on it. So about 400 to 450 trucks every year, or every third year, have to pull out of that driveway. Okay, because they only have one entry on 320 acres. Okay, they do about 30, 35 tons to the acre of beets. So you can imagine the compaction level that's there. Okay, so we actually, when they went through this, they would have to downshift with the tillage equipment to get it. Daryl, one of the brothers, went through this area, and he got all the way through down to here, and then realized he didn't downshift. This would have been, we applied it in September, and this would have been the following spring.
And they filled it all for us.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, so then he called, Gary was down here, said, can you come up here and run through this? Gary did the same thing, never thinking about it. Just, they got out, both of them looked at each other and said, wow, something's changed. Okay, because we changed that structure of the soil, we then started with being able to open that soil up and be able to do the tillage from that standpoint. I have one customer in farms about 5,000 acres in Arizona. After he started using Calcine, part of his payback, which we never even really realized, is he was using a semi-load of fuel less a year. Okay, by not having to pull as hard when he did his tillage work. Okay, so that was his aha moment, is when he did the books the year after he started using it, because it saved him fuel from that standpoint. And why is he doing that? It's like this. It's really hard to see, but here is magnesium 2909, the same sample spots, a year later, 1932 parts per million. Okay, Jim talked about the base percentage of saturation. Basically, it changed from that standpoint where we were dropping magnesium out, and we also dropped sulfur, went from 1,042 down to 548. We created magnesium sulfate and forced it down out of the soil profile. That's what it does. Okay? That's basically in some of this. They treated the whole field with 1 gallon on the west 25 acres over here, and then they came back in 2023 and did the whole field, and basically you can see how much darker. Both of them were in beans. I'm sorry, both were in corn, so you can see the NDVI and how much darker and how much more lush the foliage is from that standpoint. Okay, same thing here with some of that. This is a soybean field. I asked them not to plant soybeans. It's maybe a little bit tough to see, but we got soybeans in here. There's nothing growing. The 2 years before that, when he grew beans, nothing grew in this whole picture. Okay? When we got beans to grow, then it got really, really dry, and we fried these beans. We literally desiccated the beans because of the amount of salt water that came up. But they were pulling it in because they had no other water to choose from. So, we got them to come up, which was a big part. We just couldn't continue to have them grow because we got so much salt released, okay? But the root exudates that these give off, the sugars, really help from this standpoint, okay? This is why I say if you use it, you're going to end up noticing kochia. If you come back and start, what we saw in this one is, the guy hadn't seen kochia in his wheat in a number of years, okay? Every one of the plowed dead furrows here had kochia growing in. All those seeds, because of the application of calcine to help reduce the soluble salts, it came blowing through. Okay? We found every dead furrow that had been plowed in that field 20 plus years before that. Because here come the kochia seeds. Okay? We got soluble salts, we got them available, brings it out. Okay? So, but once we got it to go, and we were able to harvest this before they go to seed, we were able to reduce that seed population and be able to get it from there. Okay, this is in the Washburn, North Dakota area. This was all cheatgrass. Couldn't get it to die with anything else. This was calcine in the tank along with the small particle technology, and basically we were able to reduce the calcium, increase the ability of that glyphosate, and then be able to just get additional kill on that spray tank from that standpoint. So we can get rid of the cheatgrass in this sample. Okay? This again also is in that Washburn and or just to the east of Washburn. But you can see how big an area here. You can we try to stand in the same spot. It's not exact. But nothing was growing here. We can start to see kochia coming here. You can see on the edges, we started to shrink it in. And basically, when you look at the tracks, we're able to get things to grow. And again, there's nothing wrong with kochia growing or false barley growing, foxtail barley, because that's what we want. We want those root exudates to help pull some of that out. And as this ground is healing itself, that's what will happen from there. But so 1 year of treatment, we went from this to this. 2 years of treatment, we basically were back to farming the majority of it. I will not tell you right in the center here that we had a very good crop yet, but we had something growing. Okay, we got corn to come up from that standpoint. All right, seed germination. This side was planted 4 hours sooner than this side, but it also came up basically 72 hours faster. And basically after stayed ahead throughout the whole season. So this one was done in June. This one was done in August. You can see the difference of what it did for the NDVI on these two fields. The only chance, these are the same variety, two different base programs, but you can see the only difference is the markers for the land difference. They planted right alongside basically each other within 4 hours. Okay, so do seeds germinate faster with Calcine? Because we have more moisture retention around that seed, especially with the carbon products, more CO2, again, carbon, oxygen, more oxygen in the purest form, more microbial action because of that level of oxygen, increased ease of root penetration. So when you look at that really long root he showed from Lidgerwood that Jim showed, that's all a part of this. We can get that root to go deeper, straighter, to get it down there, okay? And then the increase in root hormones and excretions to improve that germination and the evenness of germination, okay? From there. So this is, again, part of that same process. You can see the program with Calcine, with other biology. Basically, you can just start to row this side, you can row on this side from that standpoint. These are sugar beets, I know, but it doesn't matter what the crop is from that standpoint. We see that 2 to 3 days out of the ground faster because of it. Same thing here, seeded on 424, both of them right next to each other. You can roll this side, you can't roll this side, okay? These are producers' pictures, not ours, okay? So, we're learning every day. That's something that we knew from all of our customers. We learned something. Probably in future years, we're gonna have continued recovery of these sodic in soils, saline and sodic soils, in-row use in the spray tank, increased nutrient release, and we don't know what else it's going to help with, but we know it's going to continue to, we're going to continue to learn from that standpoint. So, from there. All right, questions on Calcine? Okay, again, we're here to help with, this is going to improve soil health. Soil health increases, plant health increases, okay, from that standpoint. Plant health increases, yields follow. Every one of these steps go kind of the next level, okay? So, if you've got some really tough spots and you want to try to recover them, headlands, saline, sodic areas, that's where this falls in, okay? So, like I said, the one that Tim sent me yesterday? No, Monday. 1 day behind here. That was the second highest soluble salts I've seen in North Dakota at 18.7.
Those were actually from Chief, which is about 10 miles.
Yep. Okay. All right. So I'm going to switch gears on you. I'm going to go to a little bit about small particle technology. This is a product we work with that helps with basically improving the active ingredients. So this was added to that cheatgrass to help get more glyphosate uptake. So this type of technology is what we're using to get more active ingredient into the plant. Okay. Basically, the return on the PFRs are about $16 greater with this type of technology, and also then, or 30 some bucks when we're doing, say, Mavis or whatever on some of these fungicides. Okay? So, those are kind of the base materials that we work with. Here's on soybean fungicides, again, but it's the uptake. These are the small particles that basically pull nutrients, pull chemicals into that plant. Okay? So that's what these help with. The small particle technology is a great way to fulfill that opportunity to get more of what you're paying for into that plant. Getting more Roundup, getting more glufosinate, getting more whatever it is, more potassium, more whatever. So we can then start to reduce the levels of salts in the soil to help us from that standpoint. Okay? So basically these types of technology leads to where we can then utilize a potassium source, and Jim talked about it when he put up the chart and said these are the critical periods of nutrients. This is where these kind of foliar programs can come in. Critical to get more potassium in the plant right at V4, V5, and then soybeans at R1, R3. Corn also is at V11, V12, or VT from that standpoint with potassium. That's a critical part for all of it, okay? That's what these basically do, these types of products. We have different technologies now, but basically it's the same concept of being able to push forward with these to give you these types of returns. Okay, NanoCS works well to help put it. Jim actually developed this product when he was with this company, previous to where he's at today. But basically this type of a product is meant to give that small particles so you can then use less of the starters. Okay, it pays back very well. You're looking at ROIs at least in this 5-to-1 or greater over all the years I've worked with it since 2000, and Jim and Darcy have worked with it since 2017. Okay, so this type of a product really fits into being able to reduce total fertilizer needs and get it more totally into that plant. Okay, the carbon catalyst, CCAT, does a lot of those same things when you're putting it with this technology. Okay, so we can work with both sides. Okay. Now, a pack is basically a type of a, can be a standalone, or it can be, it's a very micro pack base. It's got copper, iron, magnesium, manganese, zinc in it. It helps with soybeans. It stops that yellow flash that happens when you're spraying, and it just gives that overall iron in some cases where you have high pH areas of field. Okay. Now, FE, again, not as much out here, but again, high pH soils. You've got some areas maybe in the field that are iron deficient, iron chlorosis. This is the type of product that can work in that environment. Okay? All right. So, one of the last things, and then we'll go into a little bit on seed treatment. I don't have any slides on that, but we'll talk about it from that standpoint, put it together. So this is kind of the basics of some of the types of biology that's out here. So basically you've got probiotics, which are the actual putting out mycorrhizae, putting out trichoderma, rhizobium. Those are probiotics. Those are actually feeding it. This is like cow goes off feed. What do? You put in probiotics into their gut. Okay? Prebiotics. Previously living things. These are metabolites, so we're pushing them forward. Biofertilizers contain living microorganisms. These can be applied to seeds, plant surfaces, biostimulants. Okay, this is where we fall into with some of the complex into this type of a thing, because you increase the activity of an organism of it. For sure, the sugars, the MMTS does, the CCAT does, and provides the humates with those aspects of it. And then the biocontrol. So we can work with a number of these. We have probiotics, we have the biofertilizers, we have the biostimulants, and we have the biocontrol. Basically almost all in one product, okay, from there. All right, so they're normally a byproduct of, and they have the hormones auxin, which is giving that rooting system, gibberellin, and other plant growth regulators that are there, the PGRs. So this is the byproduct of what biology does in the soil. Okay, so when Jim talks about the ability of that plant to process sugars, carbons, molasses, those are all critical pieces for the food for biology, which the plant will metabolize some, push it down, feed biology, and it's that cycle of life that happens from that standpoint. Okay, and then you have this singular limited species, Trichoderma mycorrhizal, the nitrogen fixing products that are in the market today, that are out there. So we've got all of these different types of biology. A lot of people, how do you keep it all straight? Basically that's where Tim falls into place out here now for us from that standpoint. But basically we're really looking at this diversity always used with a food source, consistency in production. We're stacking, we're utilizing things one on top of the other to get the 1 + 1 + 1 additive versus 1 + 1 and nothing else happening from there, okay? So those are all a part of this. When we use MMTS, we use Liquid Life Plus, which is this product. We use the small particle technology. We're getting more oxygen with calcines. These are all a part of being able to improve that soil quicker, easier, and give you more production in a shorter period of time from there. All right, so these are just some of them. Pivot Bio's one that's a lot of people know. And Vita's another one out here that a lot of people have worked with from that standpoint. Again, these are 2 species. These are single species. From here, basically when we're looking with Liquid Life Plus, I gotta walk through these, but basically Ultras N, which is now N+, they have a single species of methylbacterium. When we're looking at Liquid Life Plus, we have over 30 of the same methylbacterium. Okay, these are your nitrogen fixing bacteria. Some are in it, some are from that standpoint. Okay, from there. So what you're going to see with this is you're going to see increased yield, fertilizer efficiency, nutrient density, and plant health resiliency. You're going to see that plant be able to bounce back further, faster from that standpoint. Okay, from there. Just a couple of small trials, but basically it comes down to where we replaced a lot of the starter and went with the Liquid Life, and we saw a nice increase in that ability of that plant to be able to show a return on investment. Good job. All right. So basically what's going on is when we go from basically the normal farm margins, when we can put on biology, reduce N per units, especially at the price of N's today. Basically, our payback on this is by reducing nitrogen applications on your corn. From that standpoint, you're going to get a 2-to-1 return just by doing that today, putting it out. Okay? That's the beauty of this type of product today. I was in Montana last week and talking about this, and it was not a hard situation at all to be able to work with this from that standpoint. Okay? Again, every 1% of organic matter is approximately 2,000 pounds of N in the soil. So this biology release pounds, basically about 20 pounds of N per acre per year for each percentage of organic matter. Okay? Out here, most of you are dealing with 1.5, 2.5% organic matter. So you're looking at anywhere from 30 to 50 units of nitrogen from that organic matter, and that's a part of being able to release it by this biology, the rhizobium here on soybeans. But the bigger thing is being able to break everything down so you get all the nutrients out of that soil from that standpoint. Okay. The other thing is with methylithium bacterium, they pull that off of the atmospheric nitrogen. It's non-nitrogen fixing, but we're pulling the nitrogen out of the air. Again, our air is more nitrogen than it is oxygen. We always hear oxygen, but it's actually more nitrogen than it is. So you can see on air, you're looking at basically about 78% nitrogen, 20% oxygen, and then you've got the different gases, and carbon dioxide is a very small amount of what we actually do, but that's the one that gets all the media attention. Okay? It's actually not extremely high from that standpoint. Okay? Nitrogen on for your farm, you have the granular nitrogens, you have liquid nitrogens, and then you have the cover crop and residues. This is what we're going after. This is what we want to break down. If you're doing cover crops, that's wonderful. Being able to break them down, or the crop residue from the previous year. If you can recycle that corn stalks year to year to year, you reduce the amount of dry fertilizers needed. All you need is a small amount of foliar and carbons, and you're going to be able to pull more and more from that standpoint. The CCAT test that Jim talked about in his presentation basically is showing that we can increase without putting out additional potassium anywhere from 15 to 25 or more %. We just got one back from Kansas that was almost 70% ammonium. More potassium release from that standpoint. Okay? All because we're doing is we're breaking down these crop residues to get the potassium out of these corn stalks and soybean stalk. So, when you start looking at this, you can see that basically if you have corn at 150, you've got about 7,500 pounds of stover out there. It's got about 45 units of N, 51 or 15 pounds of P2O5, or about, if you're using MAP, that's about 25 pounds of MAP that can come out of those corn stalks. You have 92, which is equivalent to 150 pounds of OO60. And the big thing is you're not putting any chlorides out there, or very little. Getting about 6 pounds of sulfur, 18 pounds of calcium, 18 pounds of mag. You can kind of look across this for soybeans, but again, about 39 pounds of potassium, 24 pounds of nitrogen. Wheat stubble, this is what if you're selling wheat straw off the field, you're giving up a lot of carbon, you're giving up about 21 units of nitrogen, 7 units of potassium, and 65 units of phosphate, and 65 units of potassium. But the biggest thing here is you're giving up a lot of the sulfur that's out there. Okay? Wheat straw has a lot of sulfur. Okay? And you're letting it go off the farm. Okay? From there. So, when you start looking at, we want minerals, carbon, and biology, how we can put it together. Okay? So you're taking the 3-18-18, you're mixing it with seed catch, you're mixing it with Liquilife, you're mixing it with MMTS. Those are minerals, 3-18-18. You're taking carbon, one of those sources, or all of those sources. You're mixing it with Liquilife, biology. And every time you go out there and you do this, you're basically starting to heal that soil. Okay? So, high yielding programs, in this case, was about 45 gallons. We did a treatment with 30. We did a treatment with 22.5. Okay? Come on, catch up. All right. What it did, you can look at this. We lowered the nitrogen per bushel, but we also lowered the bushels. Okay? So we went from 225, we lost a bushel, but we reduced our nitrogen use by 45 pounds at today's nitrogen cost. Before the war, this would have been about 20 bucks an acre better for your return on investment, by reducing the amount of nitrogen and still pulling an equivalent yield. Okay? And you can do that pretty easy. When we cut it to 50% with carbon and biology, we now started to go the other way. Our net profit did decrease, and that's what we expected, but we needed to see it from that standpoint. Okay? So, 4 reasons to use Liquilife, basically. Yield. Reason number 2 is basically comes into increased fertilizer costs. We need to increase that bioavailability. 3 is nutrient density. Okay? How much can this add in weight to that plant from that standpoint? Okay? Into that test weight. And then the last one I forgot to do, but plant resiliency. This is coming back to what we were talking about before when Jim was up here. It's that plant being able to handle stress when it happens. Dry, wind, rains, excessive rains, okay? Excessive dry. That's what's going to lead to these opportunities from that standpoint, okay? So basically we're going to do solubilization of phosphate in Liquilife. We're doing nitrogen fixation, production of polysaccharide around the root to protect it. How many of you do peas or lentils or other crops that way? Any of you? Okay. So in a lot of cases with peas, we're really producing a shield around that rooting system to help protect it from the Rhizoctonia, the fusariums that are there today. Okay, by utilizing Liquilife in the furrow around that rooting system. Okay, we're changing that hair root structure. We're going to transport other nutrients to that root zone, moisture retention, improve soil structure. Basically, all of these added together is what gives you that upwards path of being able to push those yields by increasing your biology from that standpoint. Okay? All right. So, but basically you have to make sure we're here. You can see higher salt levels. Okay? We've got to watch what we're doing. We've got to watch this pH imbalance if you're too low or too high. From there, I've got some fields out here that are toxic levels of heavy metals, not in copper and zinc, but right now it's in aluminum. The pH has fallen so far, we're actually got aluminum toxicity. It's actually drying the plant out because it's pulling the moisture away from the plant. Okay? You've got bactericides and fungicides that are destroying some of the pathways in there. Oxygen level from RPAC or compaction from that standpoint, and then pathogen mutation that's continuing to happen. All of these things are what's going on from that standpoint. That's what gives us this downward spiral from reduced uptakes, decreased availability, reduced growth and yield, rapid growth of harmful pathogens, release of toxic chemicals that's happening, or nutrients from that standpoint. So just a downward spiral that we're in without some of these biologicals being able to offset some of that. Okay? So this is in organic corn, but what it does show with using a good biology, basically we're improving the test weight with it, we're improving the protein, and we're improving the methionine. Methionine is the most critical of all the amino acids that we deal with from there. What this means is if we can increase by 15%, if you were feeding cattle, that's about 4 bushels to feed a cattle from 500 pounds to 1,200 pounds. Okay? That's about $12 a head. Okay, it's present pricing, $12 to $15 a head. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when corn hits $6, that's a lot from that standpoint. Okay? So, this basically looks at dry fertilizers alone, looks at being able to put it with, from there, so this is dry only. Start putting it with Liquid Life being sprayed over the top. You can see in almost every case we increase the yield by more than the $10 or $20 investment that we have in this product, depending on the amount of gallons you apply per acre from there. Okay? If you're growing alfalfa, we see basically these solid stems, not the hollow. So you're picking up basically dry matter, you're picking up digestibility from that standpoint. So those are all critical pieces of what we've seen today. Okay? So we don't have a residue problem, we've got a fertility issues that are happening out here. So we've got to look at that part of it. Okay? So, a few things just to look at here. Basically, to check the rooting system, you can see we're picking up the additional nodulations down here. We're using in this case, we used Boost, which was a liquid molasses, but what Jim talked about from there, you want to look at what that looks like after 18 months almost. I've got a sample up here, how it's been done. It's perfectly in solution from that standpoint. The other thing I have up here is I have a sample I did a month ago at a meeting here in North Dakota. You can kind of tip it like this. You can see that basically it has been solutionizing the calcium that's in the soil from that standpoint. Okay, so basically all of this is there. If you open this, you'll hear it hiss at you because of the carbon dioxide that's built up inside of that container. Okay, so basically we can look at uptake of efficacy on fertilizers and basically help you transition any of your fields to being able to get to the regenerative side of it from that standpoint. Okay, a lot of this isn't what we're talking about today. So for your peas, basically we did this out in Arizona where they do grow the peas, and basically they couldn't get this CWE. Basically, it was destroying that pea root. So what we did is we used Liquid Life around it, and basically you can see on where without it, you don't have many of the hairs that would keep it away. You can see the mucilage. Jim talked about the sand that was hanging on to those roots. That's what this is right here. That's what's helping it hang on, but it's also a protectorant that then keeps that disease away from that rooting system. Okay? So it really helps with that aspect of being able to work with it. Okay? So this was in a clear container, basically without, and then back with. You can see on this side, they changed it. You can see how nice the white roots are, how it's growing. Or over here, you can see what CWE is doing, and that's basically your rhizotonia. It's starting to kill the upper part of this root, so it's killing all of that taproot that went down there. Okay? So biosanitation is another one from that standpoint. So just a few of these. We did a skip pass trial. 40 units of nitrogen removed, replaced with Liquid Life and Pivot Bio. We had a 2 to 8% variance in yield, and the two in favor of Liquid Life from that standpoint. Moisture was consistent. This is in the same field. The trial had Calcine and Nano in each of the passes from there. Soybeans, Liquid Life compared to a liquid inoculant, we picked up 3 bushels to the acre. And Liquid Life was just replaced for that inoculant from that standpoint. Here we sprayed 6 ounces of Nano CS over wheat. We draw a stronger stalk and heat and heads, and less shatter as the combine was going through. As the combine got closer, he could see where he'd sprayed it. The heads weren't shelling before he got to them. From there, that was the farmer's observation. Again, sugar beets. So normal starter. There's a reduced starter with Nano CS, Calcine, Liquid Life. You can see the base of the rooting systems. Again, that mucilage, that hanging on, that carbon source that Jim was talking about. You can see here, this is what we do with a lot of stocks. You can see the normal starter program. You can see Calcine with the starter. You can see down here, if you want to see this up close, it's really hard here, but this is darker. We're starting to kill these initial rooting systems that came out. And over here, it's nice and clean. You can still see the white rooting system. You have a little bit of black down here, but basically this is high salt soil. So this is Milo, grown in Kansas. No Liquid Life. Liquid Life, you can see how it's closing the rows that much faster. So, again, nodulation. I want these roots versus these. That's what Jim was talking about with the CCAP being able to push that from that standpoint. Okay, you can see right down the line on the split, starter only, where we had Liquid Life and starter nutrients on this side from there. Okay, so again, Darcy, we talked about this a minute ago, but basically if you want to look at boron, it's going to steer in the nutrients into that plant. You can add that too with a potassium and a sugar program for excessive weather, rain, hail, wind. It's not going to help with snow that's falling outside, but it'll do a lot. Taking these, putting on Liquid Life in that situation also gives you a biosanitation, helps you grow a biology that's going to help protect that plant. A little bit of copper helps to get that in as well for sugar production. So all of these things we can put together a customized, easy program for you to build off of. Okay? So this is kind of, all the things we're talking about. When you'll hear some salt be gone or turnaround, those are both against Calcine. From that standpoint, compost teas are against the Liquid Life. You got various surfactants, which calls into wet salt, Penatera, These are all surfactants. They'll work in the soil to help get more water into the soil initially, but you've got to keep putting them out there on a constant basis. Some of the others against the CCAT would be Max 22 from Nutrients or HMG from the humic. Okay, you got some really harsh acids that we would go against Calcine. Again, you're destroying because of the harsh acids. You're destroying because these are strong acids. Okay, this is sulfuric acid. The reason I went after Calcine when I found out about it is because one of my farmers in Arizona was spraying 45 gallons of sulfuric acid and the hose broke. And he walked back there not realizing it was starting to spray, and he got hit from basically his chest to his knees with 85% pure sulfuric acid. By the time the EMTs got there, his clothes were basically gone. It had eaten through everything from that standpoint. Okay? So he had third-degree burns from acid by the time he was able to get treatment from there. Okay? Other things that people are using are softer acids like acetic or sauerkraut. These are great treatments for spray additives to your spray tank to drop your pH if you have a high pH water. Okay? So, the test is a great copper-based nutrient that we can utilize to improve copper quickly. Boron 10% to get that steering wheel in of pulling nutrients in. So, grower comments, basically easy to mix ahead, utilize across numerous crops. We put that together, reduce weed pressures in row when we use the Calcine, especially with water amp and pinkweeds, which are again two other ones. Kochia is starting to be coming down as well. Program works, not exactly sure why, was what Gary Wagner's comment was when he did his video testimony. He's like, I don't know why or how it exactly works, but I know it works. Okay, so that's a critical piece. Saving money, especially in today's economy. Liquid Calcine, small particle technology worked well together. Overall results were good. Looking forward to what's happening in 2025. So, you guys are not in organics from there, and then we put custom blends together. So, that's what I've got. Okay? Appreciate any questions or thoughts, and it doesn't have to do with anything having to do here.